All right, let's get started. So welcome to lecture 12. So far we have been looking at two sort of pillars of social choice, which are matching problems and resource allocation problems. And today we'll start with the third pillar in some sense of social choice, which is voting. And you'll observe that in some sense voting actually generalizes the two problems that we have been looking at so far, matching and resource allocation. Okay, so it's a more sort of broader framework that encompasses the earlier problems that we have been looking at. Okay, so you might remember from lecture 1 I showed you a picture like this, right? So this is basically the caricature of any voting problem, right? As an input you are given the preferences of agents or voters over a set of candidates or alternatives, and a voting rule aggregates these preferences into some collective outcome, right? Some election winner, like some winner in a political or legislative election, for example, right? And I also said that, like, although voting is often thought of as like a very political exercise, it has much wider applications. For example, in the internet economy, right? All these like online engines, they ask people about their preferences over, say, movies or products, etc. And based on that, they determine, okay, which is the right winning product or a winning movie that they should recommend to you, right? And even the way Google ranks its search pages, right, that's by means of a voting rule called the page rank rule, right? And that's how it determines, okay, maybe this page is the most important, this is the next most important, and so on. Okay, so these are some of the applications of voting, but I'm curious, like, do you have any other applications of voting in mind? Have you seen voting or voting like ideas being used anywhere else other than what I've shown here? Anyone?
Reviews.
Yeah, Manav.
Reviews on some.
Reviews of what?
Reviews on some product.
On product. How is that voting?
Like 5-star, 4-star.
Ah, okay. So people give some ratings, right? Express some preferences over products. Like they say, okay, it's a 5-star product, it's a 1-star product, right? And then how do we aggregate them? Like, what's the output? What's the outcome?
I guess it's average of all the ratings.
Right. So in some sense, the search engine sort of aggregates those preferences and determines what it should recommend to you, right? Maybe that you can think of as an outcome of this process. Okay. Anything else? No other applications of voting? Amit, yeah? Sorry?
Upvoted articles on Reddit.
Upvoted articles on Reddit. Okay, so again, people are expressing preferences over articles like or dislike, right? And what would be the outcome? So how will Reddit aggregate them?
The maximum number of upvotes corresponding to some query.
Right, but the output is what? It's some article which is like the winning article, right? Which has the maximum upvotes or whatever, some kind of favorable preference from the users. Okay, anything else? Manav, yeah?
Voting in cricket, like which team will win or which team will lose.
In cricket, how?
Real-time voting, like on Hotstar there is a real-time voting key. The watchers can vote on the.
Ah, you mean like online polls, right? They say, okay, is India going to win or Pakistan going to win? You know, like some 45-55%. Okay, yeah, that's another example of reference aggregation. Okay, anything else? Mohit, yes.
In our house in elections, general elections of let's say Rajya Sabha, like they put the preferences over the candidates, and then if two people get tie, then their votes get transferred by a single transfer rule, and then the first preference of everybody gets.
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is the presidential election, right? Yeah, so that's we are going to talk about it. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Just hold on to that thought. We'll come back to that, and we'll have a chat about it. Okay. Anywhere else? Any other examples? We have lots of excellent examples. Okay, so maybe you can think about it and let me know as we go along. Okay, but I mean, I hope you're convinced that voting is sort of everywhere, right? Wherever you look, political aspects, online aspects, wherever you go, you're surrounded by voting applications. So it's an important enough thing to study. Okay, all right. So here's the sort of the very cartoon setup, again very simple setup to start thinking about voting problems. Okay, So we are going to imagine that there is a bunch of voters, V1, V2 up to V5. So these are 5 voters, and we have a bunch of candidates given by these colored circles here. Okay, so red, blue, green, and yellow, and every voter has a preference over these candidates. Okay, given in the form of a ranking of these candidates. Okay. So if you look at voter V1, we'll interpret this kind of a drawing as V1's top favorite choice being the red candidate, its next favorite being blue, then third favorite being green, and the least favorite being yellow. Okay, so that's how I'm going to read the preference of V1 here, and V2 has a similar preference, but it switches the order of say blue and the green candidate. Right? So it prefers green over yellow and blue. Okay, so every voter has some ranking of candidates in mind. These are their preferences. Okay, so this whole thing is going to be the input to our problem. This is what we are going to call a preference profile. Okay, and given this input, our goal will be to pick exactly one winner, some winning candidate. Okay, so for any such input, we want to determine one winner, right? That's the goal of this voting exercise, and the way we are going to do it is by means of something called a voting rule. Okay, so voting rule is basically a method, a procedure, an algorithm, whatever you want to call it. It takes as input the preferences and spits out a winning candidate. Okay, and it should be well defined for any number of voters, any number of candidates, any kind of rankings they may have over these candidates, and so on. Okay, it's just a mapping of this form. Okay, all right. So, although I've described voting setup in the form of rankings to you, okay, like you all observed already, it's a much more general setup, right? So people's preferences need not always be rankings. They could also be in the form of, like you observed, ratings, star ratings for example, and they could also be in the form of approval, disapproval preferences, like, dislike preferences. Okay, yeah. So the input to a voting rule can be very complex, right? It can consist of a lot of different kinds of things. And similarly, the output can also be very complex, right? So I described to you a situation where you just elect one candidate, but in many situations you may have to elect a set of candidates, right? Say you are electing a committee of people, right? So there you don't want just one winner, you want a set of, you want a winning committee, a set of people. Sometimes you may have to come up with a ranking of the candidates, right? So which candidate is the best, which is the second best, and so on. So for example, that's what Google does, right? If your candidates are search pages, Google is basically ranking those candidates in some order based on people's preferences in the form of their past searches and whatnot. Okay, so the input can be very complex and the output can be very complex, right, in general, but for us, at least, you know, in this course, we'll just assume that the preferences are given by those like straightforward complete rankings, okay, and the output is just one candidate. Okay, that's going to be the setup for the next 4 lectures. Okay, we'll generalize to richer output spaces in the next few lectures. Okay, but for now, just assume that we are in this simple setup. Any questions? Okay, good. So let's start by thinking about some concrete voting rules. Okay, so this was very abstract. Okay, so let's imagine that we have just 2 candidates, say a red candidate and a blue candidate. Okay, so what would be a reasonable way to elect a winner? So I give you a bunch of votes, right? Every voter says I like red over blue or blue over red. How would you pick the winner? What would be a good way of deciding who wins this election? Yeah, Sulbi. Oh yeah, higher vote. Yeah. So basically the majority winner is the one that we are interested in, right? The one preferred by majority of voters. It seems very reasonable, right? So for example, if I give you an input like this, right? Every voter has some preference over just 2 candidates, red or blue. Right? Makes sense to pick the one that is preferred by more number of voters, right? Because why not? It's fairly uncontroversial. Anyone who disagrees with it? Okay. Okay. So it seems like I think this is fairly reasonable choice. It's called the majority voting rule. Okay. Okay. So for 2 candidates, looks like voting problem is straightforward. Okay. So let's think about more number of candidates, right? Say 3 or more candidates. What would be a reasonable way to pick candidates now? Chirag.
We could like give them, let's say for one's voter, the first preference will get, let's say there are k candidates, so the first one will get a value of k, for example.
So you are allocating points.
Yeah, we're giving points for every voter. We're giving points to all the candidates, and then we sum up.
So I believe the candidate at the top of the list will get more points.
Yeah.
Then the second one will get fewer points, and so on and so on, right?
It will be decreasing. We'll decrease the points for every candidate, and we'll sum over all the points for all the voters, and the person with the highest points becomes the.
Yeah. So one could, for example, adopt a point-based system. Every voter says, okay, my first choice candidate is going to get, I don't know, 10 points. Second choice is going to get, I don't know, 7 points, whatever, some point system, right? And we'll just look at how many points the red candidate gets, how many points blue candidate gets, and so on. And the one with maximum number of points is the winner. Right? Simple enough, okay? Seems reasonable, and we'll see that very soon. Any other suggestions? Is there any? Could there be any other way of? Yeah, Rishi.
There could be a way where we choose the candidate who is at the top of the preference ranking for most number of voters.
Okay, so the candidate who is in the rank 1 position in the most number of votes, that should be the winner.
That can be one possibility.
Okay. Okay. So Rishi is suggesting, okay, let's look at the top choices of the voters. The candidate who appears most often in the top choices, maybe makes sense to elect that as the winner. Okay, seems reasonable. Dipanshu?
Sir, everyone gives 2 votes, and whoever gets the most votes.
Everyone gives 2 votes. So Dipanshu will say, I like red and green. Maybe Harsh will say, I like blue and yellow, and so on. And again, the color which gets most number of.
Means if there are k candidates, then k minus 1.
If there are k candidates overall, then.
They reject.
Sorry, what?
They basically reject one candidate.
Oh, they reject one candidate. Oh, so you're thinking of like a veto rule. You can just say, I hate this candidate, and rest I'm fine with. Right? So it's sort of the opposite of what Rishi was suggesting. Rishi was saying, look at the top choices. You're saying, let's look at the bottom choices and look at the one who has fewest occurrences in the bottom positions in some sense, right? Who's hated by fewest number of people.
Eliminate one person at a time.
Okay. That's more along the lines of the veto rule, right? That you often see. Okay. Anything else? So those are excellent suggestions, and I hope you'll all see those in a second. Yeah, Chirag?
I had a question. So we're assuming all voters are equally valued, right?
Depends on the definition of your voting rule. So the input to your voting rule is a ranking from every voter. Now what you do with it is up to you. You can say, I like all voters whose names start with C much more than I like all voters whose names start with R. It's a weird rule, but it's a rule, right? So you could do all those things, right? So that box that I showed you in the middle, it could do all those weird things, but yeah. There were more hands. Yeah, Surabhi?
I was saying that if we select a candidate having higher first preference, then maybe it will have more least preference. So I don't think
Intuitively,
that
it seems like if a candidate is occurring in the top positions a lot, it's probably not being ranked at the bottom that
maybe
often.
others will rank.
Yeah, these seems correlated, but yeah. So sure. I mean, but what's the suggested rule now?
That doesn't seem reasonable, right? I mean, we pick a candidate, let us say he is chosen by 2 persons that he is at the top, but 3 persons has chosen.
People might have very extreme opinions, right? Some people might really like it. Some people might really dislike it, right? So yeah, all those things could happen. Yeah. So your inputs, your profiles could look. I mean, they could look any which way. It doesn't have to have some structure in general. So, but you have any like proposals in mind for?
I don't think that is reasonable.
Oh, okay. So maybe okay. So it may not sound reasonable to everybody. Okay, point taken. Any other suggestions? Okay, good. So a lot of excellent suggestions, and I think we'll see pretty much all of them in a few minutes. Okay, good. But okay, so I hope we agree that there is something interesting to be done, because if you have 3 or more candidates, one thing is clear, that there may not be any candidate that enjoys a clear majority, right? So the thing that made our life easy in case of 2 candidates, the majority property, that is gone. right? So there is no uncontroversial way of electing a winner anymore, right? So now you have to make some choices, and you all offered some suggestions. And basically in the rest of this lecture we are going to look at a bunch of suggestions in the literature, many of which will coincide with the suggestions that you have made. Okay, and try to pay attention to the aspects that each suggestion emphasizes on, right? So each voting rule finds something reasonable, like finds some reasonable way to aggregate these preferences, but different voting rules could do very, very different things. Okay, so try to sort of be on the lookout for it. Okay. Okay, so let me start with some of those. Yeah, Dipanshu.
So what if two candidates gets equal votes?
Good, excellent. So that's the tie-breaking issue, right? For example, let's say we adopt the point system that Chirag was saying, right? And say two candidates end up with exactly the equal number of points. Who should be the winner? Well, it depends. So whenever you specify a voting rule, you also in addition specify a tie-breaking rule, right? That is part of the definition of a voting rule, right? And you could break ties in many different ways. So one way could be to just look at, say, the names of candidates. So for example, any candidate whose name starts with C is higher in the dictionary order than anyone whose name starts with R, right? So if there's a tie between candidates whose names start with C and R, I'll prefer the one whose name starts with C, for example, right? That's a lexicographic tie breaking. You could also just sort of toss a coin, just randomly pick one of the candidates. That's another way of doing it, right? But then in that case your voting rule would be a randomized rule, not a deterministic rule, right? And there's like a gazillion other things that you could do. For this lecture I'm just going to assume that whatever tie-breaking scheme you want, it has been pre-specified, so I'm not going to discuss that in detail, but know that it's a very, very important part of voting, right? So it can change the economic and computational properties of a voting rule, how you break ties, right? But today I'm not going to get into that discussion, but it's a very important discussion that I'm just sort of skipping over completely. Okay, other questions? Okay, good. Okay, so let's look at some sort of known voting rules. Okay, and the first rule that I want to start with is called plurality. Okay, and here's how it works. So the input to this voting rule is again a profile like this, right? Bunch of voters, every voter having a ranking over candidates. And given such an input, this voting rule is going to elect as winner the candidate with the most first place votes, right? So it's going to look at the first place choices of all the voters, the top row here, and the candidate that occurs the most often in those first place votes is going to be the winner. Okay, so who should be the winner here? Red, right? So red gets 2 points because it has 2 first place finishes here, and everyone else gets 1 point. Right? So it has maximum plurality points. That's why it's the plurality winner. Okay, and thankfully there was no tie, right? But suppose there was a tie between, say, red and green, then like I mentioned to Dipanshu, we'll have to use some kind of tie-breaking scheme. For example, a lexicographic scheme, a random scheme, whatever, right? So tie-breaking is sort of needed in order to complete the description of a voting rule, but it would not play a big role in today's lecture. Okay, so but remember again at the back of your heads that this is an important part that we are just sort of skipping over. Good? All right. So plurality is very nice, very easy to understand, but it has a problem, right? Which is, I think, sort of observed by someone, that a majority of people might actually not like the plurality winner. They might like someone else over the plurality winner, right? For example, the current winner on this election, the plurality winner is red, okay? But if you look at how voters vote between just red and green, there are more voters, a majority of voters, who prefer green over the plurality winner. Right? So although plurality sounds very reasonable, very simple, right, very easy to explain and all that, it has this glaring flaw that it could leave a majority of people dissatisfied, right? And this is going to be like a running theme throughout this lecture. So we'll come up with a whole bunch of reasonable definitions of voting rules, but you'll see that every single rule has some or the other flaw. Okay, so that's going to be sort of a narrative throughout. So try to again remember that aspect of voting. Okay, all right, good. But okay, so for all its weaknesses, plurality is very widely used. all over the world in legislative elections, right? So it's used in Canada, in many African countries, and it's also used in India, right? This is how we elect our representatives, right? You go to the polling station, you just check which party you like the most or which candidate you like the most, and the candidate that receives the most number of votes, that's the one that wins. Right? That's how we elect our government. Okay, so and one of the reasons for such a widespread acceptance of plurality is that it's so easy to understand. You don't need any kind of technical background or complicated knowledge of mathematics or anything to understand this. It's a very, very simple voting rule, right? That's why it's widely used despite all of its flaws. Okay, so this was plurality, okay, but it was sort of naive because it was just looking at your top place candidates. It was completely ignoring the rest of the votes, right? Anything second place or below. So here's a voting rule called the Borda Count, which is going to be more nuanced, right? It's going to be closer to the suggestion that Chirag was making, right? Let's look at all the positions and let's assign them some points. So higher positions get more points, lower ones get less points, and so on. Okay, but before that, let me just say that, okay, so this rule was proposed by a French mathematician called Jean-Charles de Borda in the 18th century. Okay, he proposed it for the French Academy of Sciences and electing the members to that academy. And he was a very interesting personality, right? He wore many hats, right? So he was, of course, a mathematician, but he was also a naval officer, right? He was an explorer. He was also very interested in measurements, right? Designing measurement instruments. So he developed a bunch of instruments for measuring angles and lengths, right? Partly given his experiences in the sea, right? And interestingly, he was also someone who was involved in the measurements for the unit that we called meter. Okay, so the way we arrived at the modern meter was by making several measurements and experiments, and he was part of it. He popularized the meter actually in Europe. So yeah, he did many things, but good for us that he also invented a voting rule. And here's how that voting rule works, exactly as Chirag was pointing out. So every voter is going to give its kth ranked candidate some number of points. Okay, so suppose the total number of candidates is some m, right? Then the first place candidate is going to get m minus 1 points, second place candidate is going to get m minus 2 points, and so on. Okay, and the last place candidate is going to get 0. Okay, so for example here we have 4, n equals to 4, so that any top candidate gets 3, then 2, then 1, and then 0. Okay, all right. So if I look at the border score of the red candidate, that would be 3 points from the vote of voter V1, 3 points from V2, and nothing from the other votes, right? So it gets a total of 6 points. Its border score is 6. Everybody clear on that? Okay. Likewise for green, you can imagine that it's 9. Why? Because it's 3 from here, 4 from these 2 votes, and 2 more from these 2 votes. Yeah, and similarly you can calculate the border scores of all the other candidates. Yeah, and now the one with the highest border score is the winner of this selection. Okay, so green is the winner on this profile, border winner. Any questions? Okay, and again I'm not talking about tie breaking, you can imagine that it's there. All right. Good. Okay, so again a very reasonable rule, right? But again something that has its flaws, and one of the flaws of Borda rule is that it is susceptible to strategic behavior, right? So voters can lie about their preferences and get a better outcome under this voting rule, right? So we have seen this property before under the name of strategy proofness, right? So this voting rule actually violates strategy proofness. Okay, so let's see why. So let's look at voter V1. Okay, currently its third choice candidate is being elected, right? That's the current winner. Okay, but if voter V1 misreports by switching its third and fourth choices, okay, then you can do the calculations that these would be the border scores, right? And if the tie breaking was such that blue was the winner, right, then then the winner would be a different candidate, blue. So if I go back to the original preference of this voter, the winner has changed from the third place to the second place. Right? So by lying about its preference, voter V1 has managed to get a better, like a selfishly more preferable candidate elected. Okay? So under this voting rule, there are incentives for a voter to not report their preferences truthfully. They can lie about it. Good? Okay. Alright. So Borda knew about this, okay, and his response was, my scheme is intended only for honest men. Okay. I mean, apart from the inherent sexism in this quote, that's not how you deal with life's problems. Okay. So okay, anyway, okay, but okay, again, so Borda has like very reasonable rule, has its flaws, but again it has many applications. Have people heard of the Eurovision Song Contest? Okay, it's a big thing in Europe, right? Every country basically sends in an entry of like its best performing group, right? And then there is a competition. They all sing and dance, and then they elect the winner. Okay, so they use Borda Count to elect the winner in the Eurovision. They actually use a variant of it, right? So the first the topmost entry gets like 12 points. The second entry gets, I think, 8 points or something. So it's not exactly the linear scoring that I showed you, but it's like Borda. It's a point-based system. Okay, and it's also used by the OpenGL library in selecting what features to implement. Okay, Borda Count also has some funny other funny applications. So it's also used by the RoboCup autonomous soccer competition, right? So it's when robots play football, because why not, right? And that's how they elect winners of the competition. They use the Borda Count rule. It's also used in electing like the world debating champions. So there is a World Public Speaking Forum. I think it's organized by the Toastmaster International. Don't ask me what they do, but that's exactly how they score their winners again. Right? So it has lots of applications, right? Because again, it's a very natural rule. You guys came up with it, right? So a very natural rule, and it's used in many places. But remember, it has its own flaws. Okay. Any questions? All right. Cool. So far we have seen two rules, plurality and Borda, and in some sense they are both point-based rules, right? Plurality just gives 1 point to the top candidate and 0 to everybody else, and then picks the candidate with the maximum number of points. Borda is more sophisticated, okay? but essentially they are both giving out points. Okay? Now I want to switch to a different style of voting rules, right? So both plurality and Borda, they were one-shot rules. You give me an input, right, and I just do one calculation and I give you an output, right? There's just one round of voting. Now we look at rules that involve multiple rounds of voting. Okay, these are known as runoff based rules. Okay, so runoff, like the English meaning of runoff is just like water that sort of flows because the soil can't hold water, right, in a rainy season, right? So these rules have a similar feel, that points basically flow from one round to another, right? Votes flow from one round to another. They have a runoff sort of a description. Okay, so runoff basically means like a multi-round rule. Okay, so let's see how it works. So the way plurality, so there's plurality in its name, so at some point that will have to play a role, right? So the way this rule works is it looks at the two candidates with the highest plurality scores, right? So again, it's going to compute plurality scores, but now it's not going to just select one winner. It's going to pick the two candidates with the highest scores and then do a head-to-head clash between them. So it's a two-round rule. Okay. Suppose my input looks like this. Okay. Sorry. So you can see that the plurality score of yellow is 1, right? So just for this, we just need to look at the top row, right? So yellow score is 1, blue is also 1, green is 2, and red is 3, right? So red and green are the two candidates with the highest plurality score, right? And so it is going to eliminate everyone else. Just keep red and green in the reckoning, and then do a head-to-head between them based on the same votes. Okay, so it's a two-round rule. First round we elect the two candidates, and then second round we do a head-to-head between them. Yeah, sorry, what's the question? Dipanshu, yeah?
So how it is true for the green? It is top preference of only one voter. Right?
No, no. Oh, sorry. So the way you read these numbers is there are 2 voters with this ranking, 1 voter with this ranking, 2 voters with this ranking, and so on. Sorry, I should have explained that, right? So these are number of voters with this ranking. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay. So let me go over it again. So because these are number of voters, so just 1 voter thinks that yellow is the best, 1 thinks that blue is the best, 2 think that green is the best. So that's why green's score is 2, and for red that's 2 plus 1 or 3. So red and green have the highest plurality points. So they survive round 1. They go to round 2, and now we do a head-to-head between them. Right? And any reasonable voting rule, when it comes down to just 2 candidates, it's going to be the same as majority. Right? If it's not, then there's something wrong. Okay. So who's the winner now? Green, right? So the plurality with runoff winner on this instance is green, right? And if I go back, so remember, the plurality winner was red, right? But the plurality with runoff winner is green, right? And that's telling you that these runoff rules are doing something on top of the single round rules, right? It's giving someone else a chance. Right? Because plurality was very brutal rule, right? It just looked at the first place and make a decision. But this is sort of giving someone else a chance. Okay, it's more generous. Sorry, we had a question. Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right. Good. So this was one multi-round rule. Here's another multi-round rule that I think Mohit observed early on. Okay. So it's known as the single transferable vote, STV. It has a bunch of other names. It's also called the instant runoff rule, or the alternative rule, and many other names. Okay? And here's how it works. A very cool definition. Okay. So in each round, it's going to eliminate the candidate with the lowest plurality score. Right? The candidate that features in the first place fewest number of times. It's going to knock that out. Okay. And it's going to transfer the support of the knocked out candidate for the next place candidate in those voters list. Okay, so let's see what that means. Suppose I'm given an input like this. Again, so these numbers are how many voters have that ranking. Okay. All right. So who's the candidate with the least plurality score? Harsh? Yellow, right? Because yellow has a score of 1. Green has 4, blue has 6, and red has 6. So yellow is the least one. So let's kick it out, right? And when I kick out yellow, all the voters, in this case just 1, their first candidate is now going to become green. So the votes in support of yellow are not going to be transferred to the next candidate in the list of those voters. Hence the word transferable over here. Okay. Okay. So this is my new election. Let me just do the same thing, right? So who has the least plurality score now? Anyone? Okay, green. Okay. Why? Because green has 5 points from these 3 votes, blue has 6, and red has 6. So I need to knock out green. Okay. Okay. So just for visual clarity, because these rankings are the same, let me just merge them. Okay. And now let me knock out green. Okay. So green is gone. Now what? Now it's just 2 candidates, right? 2 horse race. So what should we do? Kunal?
Add the first one.
Add what?
Whoever is having the first one.
Yeah. So can you say how should I do it?
Give points to the having the first priority. That is in the first priority. 3 plus 3 plus 3, 9.
3 plus 3 plus 3. So there are 9 voters who prefer red over blue, and there are 2 plus 4 plus 2. That's 8 voters who prefer blue over red. So red wins the majority head to head, right? So red should be the winner. Okay, very good. Is that clear? Right. So in every round, you knock out the candidate with the smallest plurality score, transfer the votes, lather, rinse, repeat. Okay. Clear? Okay. Good. So STV is again a widely used voting rule. Again, it's used in North America, it's used in Australia, it's used in Papua New Guinea, and it's also used in Ireland, interestingly. In fact, I would say that it's not used sufficiently widely because it's a very nice voting rule. STV is also used in Oscars, in the Academy Awards. So the way the best picture nominees are chosen, that's using STV rule. Okay, so that's sort of a trivia. And like Mohit observed early on, it's also used to elect the President of India. Right, so the way so first of all you get the votes from all the members of legislative assemblies, right, and you basically process them according to STV. I mean, it's not exactly STV because there is some say weight distribution going around, right, so it does not treat all the weights equally. So the way it works is, at least in the Indian context, is that they try to equalize the weight of the MPs, the member of parliaments, and the members of legislative assembly. Right? Once those weights are equal, and then it does some computation on top of that, but it has this STV-like structure to it. Okay. So yeah, again, many applications, but again, like I said, I have to point out a flaw. Okay. So STV has its flaw, which is the failure of something called a property called monotonicity. Okay. Which basically means that sometimes improving the support of a candidate. So say there is an election winner, and I ask some voter to sort of bump that candidate up in their ranking, and lo and behold, that candidate will end up losing the election. Okay, so sometimes that can happen. Here's an example. Okay, so this was the same example we saw before. Red was the winner, remember? Yeah? Okay. So now let's say these voters are having second thoughts. They are saying that, okay, red is winning anyway, so let's bump it up to the top position in our vote. Okay, now red is at the top, and if you recompute everything, so let's do the recomputation, right? So again, you'll knock out yellow, right? So let's knock out yellow. Okay, I think I'm just merging them. Okay, so let's knock out yellow. Then you have three candidates. Who should I knock out? Someone shout out. Red, blue, or green? Dipanshu? Blue should be knocked out because it has a score of 4, green has 5, and red has 8. So now blue is knocked out, right? Remember last time green was knocked out. Now it's a head-to-head between red and green, and who wins it? Green wins it. Okay, excellent. Right. So what we did was we bumped up the winner, right? We increased the support of a winner, and somehow it ended up losing the election. Right. So that's a violation of a property called monotonicity. Right. Monotonicity says if you improve the support of a winner, it should not lose. Right, so better support is only going to help you, but unfortunately not sometimes. Okay. All right. Okay. So this was one of the flaw. Here's another flaw of these runoff based or multi-round voting rules, and it's like as real world example as it gets. So this is the data from the Olympic elections. So this was an election which was done in order to decide who will host 2016 Olympics. Okay, and these were so there was a sort of an initial pre-processing round, some screening, etc., etc. But ultimately it was a 4-horse race. Okay, Rio, Madrid, Tokyo, and Chicago. These were the 4 candidates left. Okay, and then I mean there are some people who have to vote. Okay, so they did round 1 of voting. Okay, and this is how many votes. This is how many votes were cast in favor of each city. Okay, so 28 people supported Madrid, 22 Tokyo, 18 Chicago, etc., etc. Okay, so that's why, because Chicago had the least support, it was knocked out, right? And in the next round you do another computation, and in the next round you do another computation. Okay, so fine. What I want to point out here is this little, like these 2 cells here. Okay, so in first round, Tokyo had a support of 22 votes. Okay, now in the next round, Chicago was not there; it was knocked out, right? But interestingly, the support of Tokyo dropped. Okay, so for some reason there were fewer people who supported Tokyo, even though there was one fewer candidate. Okay, so what may have happened and this is again a theory, it's not like the real reason, is that some people may have supported Tokyo to take support away from Chicago. Right? You pretend that you like Tokyo so that Chicago has less support and it gets knocked out early on. And once you know that Chicago has been knocked out, you withdraw your support and actually support the candidate you care more about. Right? So these things do happen. I mean, this is actual. These are actual numbers. These are real numbers. Okay. I don't know who are these two people. Don't ask me. But yeah, I'm not making these numbers up. Okay. Okay. And any questions? All right. Okay. So these are like a couple of multi-round or runoff based rules. Plurality with runoff and STV. Okay. Now I want to switch to like a third category of voting rules, right? Which were proposed. I mean, which basically follow a property that was advocated by this guy Nicolas de Condorcet. Okay. So let's see. I mean, so this guy was, if you are paying attention to the years, he was a contemporary of Borda. Okay, and safe to say that him and Borda were not the best of friends. Okay, I won't say anything more than that. But Condorcet was again someone who wore many hats, right? He was a mathematician, he was a philosopher, right? He was like a very public figure, and he was also, like, importantly, an advocate of equality, gender equality, racial equality, constitutional equality. So he was like very active on those lines, okay? Among other things. And he proposed a criterion. He said that, okay, let's think about this property that any reasonable voting rule should have. Okay, and that candidate, that property is the following. So if there is a candidate, suppose there exists a candidate that beats every other candidate in a head-to-head election. Right. So head-to-head election is basically you pick candidate A and candidate B and look at how many voters prefer A over B and how many prefer B over A. And if more people prefer A over B, it wins the head-to-head. Right. Suppose there exists a candidate that wins every one of its head-to-head elections. Suppose, right? Then it makes sense to elect it. Right? In a head-to-head, it's better than every other candidate, so why are you not going to elect it? Right? Seems reasonable. Okay. For example, say you have a profile like this. So here, if you do a head-to-head between red and blue, so 3 voters and 1 voter here. So 4 voters prefer red over blue, and 1 prefers blue over red. Right? So red wins this head-to-head election, right? Likewise, if you do a head-to-head between yellow and blue, then blue is the winner, yeah? And likewise between red and yellow, okay? So if I try to represent this head-to-head victory relation in the form of a graph, you'll see that red beats both blue and yellow, right? It wins all of its head-to-head elections, okay? So such a candidate is known as a Condorcet winner. Okay, and what Condorcet laid out was that if there happens to exist a Condorcet winner in your input, it makes sense to elect it. Right? And this property, this suggestion is called Condorcet criterion. Okay, so any voting rule that always elects a Condorcet winner, if one exists, is said to satisfy a Condorcet criterion. Okay, it's a property of voting rules. But okay, so the keyword here is if. Okay, so such a candidate actually may not always exist. Right? Here's a simple example. Suppose the rankings are like cyclic arrangements, right? So if you draw the head-to-head graph, you might get a cycle. So no candidate is winning all of its head-to-heads. Right? So there is no Condorcet winner in this instance. In fact, such a cycle is called a Condorcet cycle. Okay. So if you have an input like that, then Condorcet criterion is sort of moot. Right? It only applies to inputs where there does exist a Condorcet winner. If there is an input where there does not exist a Condorcet winner, well, Condorcet criterion is not saying anything. You can do what you want. Okay. But this is still somewhat of a problem. And it has a very famous name. It's called the Condorcet paradox. Why is it a paradox? It's a paradox because it demonstrates that transitivity or rationality in the preferences of individual voters, may not translate to transitivity or rationality at the level of the society. Right? notice that every individual voter here has a very clean ranking of all the candidates, right? There's no cycles or anything. It's like I know what my first choice is, I know what second is, I know what third is, right? But the society is confused, right? Society cannot decide who is the top or the second or the third candidate, right? So it's basically exhibiting a very simple instance where rationality among individuals does not translate to rationality at the level of the society. Okay, and I think this is one of the reasons what makes social choice or voting so interesting. Right? Otherwise, if it was so easy to translate preferences, then there wouldn't be too much to do. Right? Any questions? Okay. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to present to you a couple more of voting rules that obey the Condorcet criterion. Okay, and that these voting rules are both going to rely on these head-to-head elections, as will become clear in a moment. Okay. So the first such voting rule is called the Copeland voting rule. Has anyone heard of it? No one? Okay. So here's how it works. For every head-to-head election, right, a candidate will get 1 point if it wins that head-to-head, 0 if it loses, and 0.5 if there is a tie, if equal number of voters prefer the two candidates. Okay. So if I have an input like this, okay, let's look at the head-to-head between red and blue. So 3 plus 1 plus 1, 5 voters prefer red over blue, and 8 voters prefer blue over red, right? Okay, so this is the head-to-head, right? So these are the numbers, which means blue wins this head-to-head. So blue is going to get 1 Copeland point and red is going to get 0 Copeland point because of this head-to-head, right? By this definition over here. Good? Okay. Let's do one more. So let's look at red and green. So 3 plus 1 plus 1 plus 4, 9 voters prefer red over green and 4 prefer green over red. So red wins this one, gets 1 Copeland point, green gets nothing. Okay, and this is what you do for all other pairs. Okay, so every candidate is getting either 0, 1 or a half point from the head-to-head, right? And ultimately the winner is the one who gets maximum number of Copeland points. Okay, so red is getting 2 Copeland points, blue is getting 1 plus 1 plus 1, 3 points. So you can't beat blue, right? Because there's 4 candidates and there can only be 3 head-to-heads in which any candidate is involved in, right? So that's why the winner is blue. Good? Everybody happy? Okay. So this is the Copeland winner, Copeland voting rule, and I bet that you have seen this rule elsewhere. You may not have heard the name because this is used in sports leagues all around the world, right? So sports don't involve elections, right? There's no voting, no one casts a ballot in sports, right? It's just teams playing against each other. So how is it used? Well, you can imagine the teams as being the candidates, right? And anytime 2 teams play each other, that's like a head-to-head election, right? So if a team wins a game, it gets say 2 points, the other gets 0 points, right? If it's a draw, then both get 1 point, right? So it's a very Copeland style scoring. Okay. So this kind of scoring is used in a whole bunch of places, right? In football, in cricket leagues, and in chess, and like tons and tons of others. Okay, so these are all like either Copeland or variants of Copeland. Okay, so it's a good voting rule to know. Yes, Rishi.
The examples which you just gave about teams winning, so in that setting, can we analogously think of voters and what the voters do?
There is no preference over teams, right? It's just a competition where one candidate beats the other. So I was just giving an analogy. I won't say there is a clear-cut election there, but the scoring system is analogous to Copeland. Right. So for example, in IPL, right, teams play home games and away games, and so there's like 2 elections between any 2 teams, right? So say Delhi plays Mumbai, in Delhi once and in Mumbai once. So there's
no analogy with voters.
Yeah, there's no clear vote per se, but there is an election because there are teams doing head-to-head. Right? So don't do like a direct mapping to political elections, but this is a contest, right? You have to elect a winner. So yeah, I mean in that sense the scoring is analogous to Copeland. Good point. Other questions? Okay. Anyone? Am I missing some examples? Anyone knows any other examples of Copeland rule? Okay, let me know if something comes to mind. Okay, I'm curious to know other examples because I think it's a very widespread, very widely used rule that somehow we don't acknowledge it. Okay, good. So here's the problem with Copeland, which is that sometimes voters are better off not voting. That sounds very weird, but here's what it means. So here's the instance that we just saw. Okay, the winner was blue. These were the head-to-heads. Okay. Now let's look at these three voters whose ranking is given by this. Okay. Currently their second choice candidate is the winner. Okay, so they are not very happy about it. They are like, what the hell, let's just stay at home, right? Right. So I mean, staying at home is a good advice in COVID times, but also if you are using Copeland rule, sometimes it can help. Okay, so suppose these guys don't turn up. Okay, you can do the calculations and verify that now red is the winner. Okay, so just by not showing up, they are able to get a better candidate elected. And this is a flaw because the voting rule should not incentivize people to not turn up. Like the whole point of using voting is to bring people to express their preferences, and this is doing quite the opposite. So it seems a bit strange, but okay, that's how it is. Questions? Okay. So here's the final voting rule for today, I promise. It's again a rule that uses this head-to-head election concept, but it's I will say it has the most fun, like the most computer sciencey definition of all voting rules. Okay, so as students of computer science, I'm sure you'll enjoy the definition of this the most. Okay, and it's also the most complicated one. Okay, it's called the Schulze rule. Okay, so here's how it works. The way you elect a Schulze winner is basically it's the candidate who chain beats every other candidate in some kind of a graph. Okay, so right now none of this makes sense. It's just some abstract terminology. So let's see what it means. Okay, so suppose I'm given an input like this. So in order to execute the Schulze rule, I'm first going to draw a matrix whose rows and columns are the candidates. Okay, it's a square matrix, and any entry of this matrix, so say the blue row and the red column entry, it's going to be the number of voters who prefer blue over red minus the number of voters who prefer red over blue. Okay, so that's going to be the number that goes here. Okay, so how many voters prefer blue over red? Well, let's see. So these two people and these four and these four and these three, right? 2, 4, 4, 3, and those 8 people prefer red over blue. So turns out to be 5, and I'm going to put a +5 because when I fill the other entry, it's going to have a minus sign. Okay, so that's how you fill in the entries of this matrix. It's the difference in the pairwise preferences. Good. Okay, it's known as the pairwise comparison matrix. Okay, right? So I fill in this matrix. Notice that the diagonals are 0, and it's a skew symmetric matrix. So the mirror entries have opposite signs, mirror across the diagonal. Okay. All right. Okay. So now let me forget about the votes because I have a lot of information in this matrix. Okay. And now I'm going to represent this matrix as a graph. So the vertices of these graphs are again the candidates, and I'm going to draw an edge from a candidate to another with weight equal to the entry given from this matrix. Right. So I'll draw an edge from blue to red with a weight of +5. Right. And analogously in the other direction, there will be an edge from red to blue with a weight of -5 that I have not shown here. Okay, but know that it's there. I've just not drawn it. Okay, so I'm going to draw a graph with weights given by this matrix. Okay, that's this pairwise comparison graph. Okay, questions? Okay, so I started with the rankings, I computed the matrix, and I drew a graph. Okay, so let me forget about this. Now I'm going to define something called the strength of a path. Okay. So what is a path? So a path from say green to blue would be like green to yellow and yellow to blue. Like that's a path in a graph, right? So I'm going to define the strength of this path as the weight of the weakest edge or weakest link in that path. Okay. So say we consider the green to red path. So say green to yellow, yellow to blue, and blue to red. So what is the strength of that path? Anyone? Kunal, you want to go? Sorry, not Kunal. Vamsi, are you raising a hand? Okay, not. Okay, Kunal, sorry. Three. Yeah. Why? Because there is an edge of 3 and every other edge has higher weight. So it's the weakest one is 3. Right? So the strength of the path green, yellow, blue, red is 3. Okay, and similarly you can calculate the strength of every other path. Okay, so now can someone help me answer the question, what is the strongest path from red to green? So there could be many paths between two nodes. Okay, every path has some strength given by the weight of the weakest edge. What is the strongest path from the red node to the green node? Anyone shout out? Vamsi now, yes. I can't hear you. 7. Why? So this is 1. Why is there no other path? They are negative, right? Because all the other edges are all the other outgoing edges have negative weights, right? So you can't increase the weight more than that, right? You've already encountered a negative weight. Okay, good. So the strongest path is basically this one, like Vamsi mentioned, right? Another strength of 7. Okay. What about the strongest path in the other direction? Okay, Saurav.
Green to blue, green to purple.
Green? Green to blue. And then? To red, right? So this path here has a minimum, the minimum, the weakest link is 5, right? Any other paths though?
Green to yellow and yellow.
Green to yellow? Yellow to red, okay. So what's the weight here? That's 1 because this is the least weight edge, okay. Anything else?
Yellow to blue to red.
Green to yellow to blue to red, right? There's another path, but the strength is the same, right? Because it's going through the same edge, so the strength is still. Sorry, actually the strength is 3. So it's actually weaker than this path. My bad, right? Okay. Is that it? Any other paths? None. Okay, good. So the strongest path is green to blue to red. Right, this one here, it has a strength of 5. Questions? Okay, all right. Okay, so now I'm going to define the chain beats relation. Okay, so I'm going to say that candidate A chain beats candidate B, right? I'm going to write it as like this double greater than sign. If the strongest path from A to B is stronger than the strongest path in the other direction, B to A. Okay, so I fix two candidates, look at all paths from A to B, look at the strongest one, likewise look at the strongest path in the other direction, and look at which of those two have higher weight. That's the sense in which A would chain beat B. Okay, so it's a bit of a mind bender, it's a very complicated definition. Okay, so let's maybe sort of look at it again in this example. So I claim that red chain beats green. Okay, that would mean that the strongest path from red to green is stronger than the strongest path from green to red. Why is that? Mohit. Sorry? 7 is greater than 5 last time I checked, right? So the strongest path from red to green is 7 like we observed before, and the strongest path from green to red was this one, which has a strength of 5. So the strongest path from red to green is stronger, that's why chain beats green. Questions? Okay. So the strongest path has strength 7, strongest path in the opposite direction has strength 5. This is more, that's why chain beats screen. Good? It's a bit of a complicated definition that takes a second to get used to, but okay. I hope it's clear. Any questions about it? Good. Okay, good. So let's do one more. Okay, so by the way, I'm going to capture the chain beats information in a different graph where red chain beats green. I'll add this weird symbol. Okay, all right. Let's do red and blue. So why is it that red chain beats blue? Anyone? Ryan.
From red to blue, it's 7.
Red to blue, 7. Give me the paths.
Red to green.
Red to green.
And green to blue.
Green to blue. Okay, so there is definitely a path with strength 7. Is there any other path with higher weight? So you can't go here and you can't go here. And once you come here, you could go like this, but then you have hit a 3, so you can't do anything. Okay, so it's 7.
And from blue to red, you have to go to that 5 edge. Right?
So this is one option. Anything else?
We could
No,
say
because
go-
all of these are negative, right? These are incoming, so you can't do better. Excellent, right? So red to blue was 7, blue to red was 5, so red chain beats blue. Okay, great. So I'll add a chain beats edge here as well, right? Note that although in this graph blue beats red, but red chain beats blue, right? So beats and chain beats could point in the other direction, right? So chain beats is a very sort of complex thing that depends on the path structure, and it might disagree with beats relation. Okay. All right. And you can do this exercise for all pairs of agents here. I'm not going to go through it, right? What you will observe, however, is that yellow ends up chain beating everyone else. Okay. And now I can go back to the definition. It's so Schulze will select as winner the candidate who chain beats every other candidate in the pairwise comparison graph. So this was the chain beats relation. So my Schulze winner would be yellow. Okay. So here it just magically turned out that there was a candidate that chain beat everybody, right? However, it turns out that actually there will always exist such a candidate, no matter what input you give me. Okay. So Schulze winner, a candidate that chain beats everyone else, actually always happens to exist. Okay, this is not a trivial statement. It requires a proof. Okay. But essentially the argument is that the chain beats relation, it's a transitive relation, right? So if A chain beats B and B chain beats C, then A will also chain beat C. Okay, so you can use this property to prove the existence of a Schulze winner. Yes, Harsh.
Would finding the Schulze winner be equivalent to finding the edge with the minimum maximum incoming weight edge?
Edge with the minimum maximum, and so what is an incoming weight of an edge?
Incoming edge, like say for yellow, incoming edges are just green to in this graph.
In this graph, so for yellow the incoming edge is 3 and 70, 3, just 3, right?
3,
Yeah.
And for blue that would be 17 and 9.
Right.
So we want to minimize over the maximum incoming weighted edge.
So you're only looking at local neighborhood, but paths are more global, right? Paths could sort of go anywhere, but all you're looking at is, like, if I'm a candidate, you're just looking at my neighborhood, but paths to me can sort of,
Yes, but any path that coming
it will come through one of those edges. Yes.
through one of
Yes.
the neighbors,
Yes.
and since that weight is minimum,
Yes, but there could be even smaller weights elsewhere that are not incident on me. So the weight is, because the path is only as strong as the weakest link in it, so there could be a really tiny edge elsewhere. Even though all of my incident weights are pretty high, I can't do anything about it. So it's not completely like the same thing, right? Ryan,
Is it
yeah.
actually guaranteed to exist? Like, if we
Say
just-
it-
when is this such a like a node guaranteed to exist? If we take just an example where there are two candidates and two voters, and they each vote one.
Yeah, good, excellent. So I cheated a little bit. Excellent. So Ryan has caught me. So I've said it's stronger than. Ideally, you would say it's at least as strong as. Okay. So then there could be multiple candidates that chain beat everyone, and then you do some tie breaking and all that, right? But just for this example, I was sort of using the stricter definition because it's cleaner. Okay. Excellent point. Yeah. Thanks for catching that. I thought I'll almost get away, but no, Ryan caught me. Okay. Good. Any other questions? Everyone happy with this definition? Okay. So, yeah, Saurabh, yes.
So like how can we understand chain beats in a
Chain, yeah, it's difficult to understand, right? So it's saying that there is at least so much support when I beat you and you beat that guy and that guy beats that guy and that guy beats you, compared to support in the opposite direction. So there's at least like the worst case support that this chain of beat relations has is more than the worst case support in the opposite direction. That's why I'm better than you. Okay, it's a bit complicated. I mean, it's harder to explain in English, but I think if you stare at it, hopefully it will start making sense. Okay, yeah, thanks. So sorry, is there a question? Okay. So what I would recommend all of you to do is try to prove that a Schulze winner always exists. Okay, if you want, you can assume here that instead of stronger, it's at least as strong as. Okay, to sort of have a guaranteed existence, but try to prove this. It's a very nice exercise. Put up the proof on Teams or Piazza or whatever. Okay. Good. So this was like the very complicated graph theoretic definition. And you can imagine that a rule with such a nerdy definition is used in nerd circles, right? So it's used in like various Linux distributions, Ubuntu, Debian, Gentoo, etc. It's used by scientific societies, IEEE, ACM, in electing their members. It's used by Topcoder. And interestingly, it was also used by NTV at a certain point to decide which music videos to show. Okay, so maybe yeah, some social choice theorist found a job at NTV. I don't know. But what you will notice is that Schulze is not used in legislative elections. Think about why. Okay. All right. Okay. So I've given you a whole zoo of voting rules, right? And it is a pertinent question to ask. Okay, which is the best voting rule, right? I mean, there's got to be a best one, right? Like you can't just have like 10 different ways of electing people. That way, you'll never make a choice. So this question was asked to a bunch of voting theorists in a social choice workshop in 2010. Okay, about 12 years ago. So there were like 22 experts in this area, and they were asked like which voting rule is the best. So the exact question that was put up in front of them was, what is the best voting rule for you, for your town to use to elect the mayor? It's basically asking what is the best voting rule. Okay, it's just a fancy way of putting it. And here's the result. Okay, so there's something called approval voting, which is basically, I think one of you suggested, right? The candidate that gets most number of likes. Right? That's a voting rule I did not talk about, but it's there. It got the maximum number of votes. STV was also pretty high. Then Copeland. Then something called Kemeny. I didn't talk about Kemeny today, but we will in a couple of lectures. Okay, it's again a rule that takes as input rankings and actually outputs a ranking of candidates, not just one candidate. Borda was towards the end, and interestingly, plurality no one liked. Okay, the simplest voting rule, very widely applicable, very easy to explain. No votes from experts. Okay. So this is interesting. There was a catch though, which was that that the votes were counted via approval voting. Okay. So they asked people, just tick all the voting rules that you like. So approval got the most approvals, and and so on. Okay. So I mean, read into it what you want, but I mean, I hope you see the problem here. Okay. All right. All right, but I mean, more seriously, we will talk about the question of which voting rule is the best in a more principled manner in the next couple of lectures. Okay, there is a way in which you can think about it. I'm not going to say you can answer it, but there's a systematic way to think about it. Okay, so I want to finish with an example, an awesome example. So this is an election with I think 55 voters. Interestingly, the different rules that I showed you, they all elect different candidates. Okay, so plurality elects red, Borda elects yellow, plurality with runoff elects something else. The two Condorcet rules, Copeland, the sports rule, right, and Schulze, the nerdy rule, they elect pink, and STV, the Rajya Sabha rule, they elects green. Okay, so all voting rules, they're all very reasonable sounding, but there exist inputs where they all give you different advice. Okay, and I would say this is a feature, not a bug, because what it is telling you is that there are many ways to think about social choice, many ways to think about what is a reasonable election, right? What is a reasonable notion of a winner? And it's telling you that, I mean, this problem is very interesting, right? Different ways of approaching this problem can give you different answers, so it makes sense to systematically think about it. Okay, all right. So let me stop here. Next class will be on strategic aspects or lying in elections. Okay, but it would be in a while from now. So it would be on October 7th because of the mid semesters, the minor exams and the break and everything. Okay, so we'll meet in a couple of weeks. I'll suggest that in the meantime you all work on your projects and make some progress there. I will be available to meet, of course. Just send me an email. I'm very happy to chat about anything. Okay. But the next class will be on October 7th in 14 days. Okay? Good. So these are the references. Let me know if I have any questions. Chirag.
So the Condorcet based votings were to mitigate the fact that there might exist cycles, right? So
no, cycles could exist regardless, right? They could exist inputs where there is a Condorcet cycle and there's nothing you can do about it. The Condorcet based rules were saying that, okay, on inputs where there does not exist a cycle, meaning there exists a candidate that is better than everyone else, your voting rule should pick that candidate. So on good inputs, your voting rule should pick the candidate. On bad inputs, all bets are off. We don't know, right? So you could do something else.
So like in the two voting rules that you explained, if there is a cycle, then
we don't know. The voting rule is free to do something else that it finds reasonable. But I'm saying that whenever there exists a Condorcet winner, you better pick it.
Okay, so all in all of the examples there was a Condorcet.
You tell me. What do you think? Was there one? Okay, think about it. Any other questions? Okay, cool. No questions. Let's meet in a couple of weeks. Thank you.